The moment you stop reaching out, she feels it. Not because you disappeared, but because the version of you she controlled just died. I'm going to tell you something most men never hear. When you go no contact, you think you're punishing her. You think you're creating space. You think you're protecting your dignity. And yes, you are doing all of that. But psychologically, something far more powerful begins unfolding inside her mind. You see, when a relationship ends, or even when it becomes unstable, the brain doesn't process it like a simple goodbye. It processes it like withdrawal. Attachment bonds activate the same neurological pathways as addiction. That's not poetry, that's neuroscience. When you remove your attention, your validation, your predictable presence, you interrupt her emotional supply, and phase 1 begins immediately. At first, she feels relief. Yes, relief. Not regret, not longing, relief. Because when tension builds between two people, especially when emotions run high, the nervous system craves quiet. When you go silent, she tells herself, "Good, this is better. I needed this space." She may even double down on that belief. She may post more, laugh louder, appear unaffected, but relief is a surface emotion. Underneath it sits something much more fragile, ego stabilization. Her identity, in part, was reinforced by your pursuit, by your texts, by your reactions, by knowing she could reach you and you would respond. When that disappears, her brain initially soothes itself by minimizing your importance. He'll come back. He always does. He needs me more than I need him. This is self-protection, not indifference. Now listen carefully. Most men fail right here. They panic during this relief stage because they interpret her calmness as replacement, as if she has already moved on. So they break no contact too early. They send the just checking in message. They watch her stories obsessively. They react. And in doing so, they reset the psychological clock. Because the true power of no contact is not about silence. It's about uncertainty. Human beings are far more disturbed by ambiguity than by loss. Loss is final. Ambiguity lingers. When you disappear without anger, without drama, without closure-seeking behavior, you create a question mark in her mind, and the brain hates unanswered questions. Phase 2 quietly begins. Curiosity. At first it's subtle. She wonders what you're doing. She checks your social media, even if she tells herself she won't. She rereads old messages. She tries to detect patterns. Were you serious? Were you pretending? Did you already meet someone else? Here's the truth most men don't understand. When you stop reacting, you regain psychological leverage. Not because you're playing games, but because emotional investment becomes visible only when access is removed. During the relationship, your presence was constant, predictable. Now, your absence becomes loud, and silence forces reflection. Curiosity is not yet regret, but it is the doorway to it. Because once curiosity attaches to ego, it turns into comparison. She begins comparing how she felt when you were consistent versus how she feels now. She compares your attention to the silence, your validation to the void, and something uncomfortable starts forming. Doubt. Why isn't he reaching out? Did I misjudge him? Was I more invested than I thought? This is where power quietly shifts. You're no longer chasing reassurance. She is chasing clarity. And here's what you must understand. The strength of no contact depends entirely on your internal discipline. If you are using it to manipulate, you will leak anxiety. If you are using it to heal and rebuild yourself, your energy changes. Women are highly attuned to emotional shifts. Even without contact, she will sense if you are spiraling versus stabilizing through mutual friends, through subtle digital cues, through the absence of desperation. Regret cannot grow in the presence of predictability. It grows in contrast, and right now, contrast is building. But you must hold steady, because the most difficult emotional test hasn't arrived yet. And when it does, most men fold. Don't be most men. After curiosity settles in, something more uncomfortable begins to surface inside her, destabilization. This is the phase men rarely see because it happens quietly. No dramatic confession, no immediate apology, just a slow psychological shift that starts to unsettle her sense of control. You have to understand something critical about attachment dynamics. In most breakups, even when she initiates distance, she unconsciously expects continuity. She expects emotional access. She expects you to hover somewhere in the background, not fully gone, just paused. When you truly go no contact, you violate that expectation. And when expectations are violated, the brain searches for explanation. Phase 3 begins. Ego disruption. Her confidence about the breakup starts to crack. The narrative she told herself that you would chase, that you would circle back, that you couldn't detach, starts losing evidence. Days pass, then weeks. Silence remains. Now her internal dialogue changes tone. He's being stubborn. He's trying to make a point. Okay, but how long is this going to last? Notice the shift. It's no longer relief. It's no longer casual curiosity. It's impatience mixed with discomfort. Because when someone we're attached to withdraws cleanly, it challenges our perceived value. This is not about manipulation. It's about psychological mirroring. During the relationship, she measured her desirability partly through your responsiveness. When that responsiveness disappears without hostility, she can't categorize it easily. Anger would be easier to dismiss. Bitterness would confirm emotional attachment. But calm detachment? That's destabilizing. And this is where phase 4 quietly forms, emotional comparison. She begins comparing you to new interactions. Conversations feel different. Attention feels different. Even if she talks to someone else, it doesn't carry the same emotional familiarity. Your absence becomes measurable. The human brain romanticizes what it can't access. This is called the scarcity effect. When something becomes less available, its perceived value increases, especially if it once felt secure. But here's the catch. Most men never realize. If during no contact you are publicly spiraling, posting emotional quotes, trying to appear overly happy, seeking visible validation, you dilute scarcity. You replace mystery with transparency. The strongest no contact is silent growth. When she senses that you are not only gone but evolving, the comparison intensifies. Because now it's not just, why isn't he texting? It becomes, is he becoming better without me? That question is powerful, not because it hurts her, but because it forces introspection. Regret doesn't ignite from missing your attention alone. It ignites from recognizing lost potential. She starts replaying moments. Not the fights. Those were easy to justify. She replays the steady things. Your loyalty, your effort, the comfort of your presence, the inside jokes, the small consistencies. Memory is selective. Over time, emotional intensity fades faster than emotional security. And when security fades, the brain edits reality. Now something subtle but important happens. She tests the waters. Maybe she watches your story quickly. Maybe she likes an old post. Maybe she sends a neutral message, something casual, low risk. Hey, hope you're doing well. Nothing dramatic. This is not random. It's temperature checking. She wants to see if access still exists, if the door is unlocked, if you're still emotionally available on demand. And this is where most men collapse. They respond instantly. They over-engage. They reveal lingering vulnerability. They try to restart what was barely beginning to shift in their favor. When you react too quickly, you reassure her that nothing changed, that she still holds emotional leverage. But when you remain composed, not cold, not rude, just grounded, the destabilization deepens, because now she feels something new, uncertainty about you. And uncertainty is the birthplace of regret, not because she's losing control of you, but because she's realizing you may truly move on. This is the moment the emotional equation flips. She begins imagining life without you, not as a temporary phase, but as a permanent outcome. And permanence triggers fear, not loud fear, quiet fear, the kind that shows up at night when distractions fade, the kind that whispers, "What if I miscalculated?" That whisper is the beginning of real regret, but it's still forming, and what happens next determines whether it grows or disappears forever. When uncertainty settles into her chest and doesn't go away, the emotional temperature changes. This is where phase 5 begins, emotional reframing. Up until now, she has been analyzing you from a position of distance. Now she starts analyzing herself. Silence forces reflection. When there's no new data from you, no updates, no emotional reactions, no reassurance, her brain has nothing left to interpret except memory. And memory, when filtered through absence, becomes powerful. She starts asking different questions. Was I too reactive? Did I push him away? Why does it feel heavier now than it did when we ended? This isn't weakness, it's attachment recalibration. When a bond is disrupted and the expected reconnection doesn't happen, the mind revisits its own role in the rupture. The ego that once protected her begins softening. Pride becomes less satisfying when it's paired with silence. And here's something most men never consider. Regret doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels like restlessness. She becomes more irritable. Small things annoy her. Conversations feel shallow. Distractions don't hit the same. She might not even consciously link it to you at first. But emotionally, the absence is now integrated into her daily rhythm. You are no longer just missing. You are felt. This is phase 6, idealization under distance. When people lose access to someone who once felt emotionally safe, the brain edits imperfections out of the story. It doesn't replay every disagreement. It replays warmth, stability, the way you showed up when things were calm. The brain protects attachment bonds by polishing memories. Now contrast intensifies. If she meets someone new, she compares emotional depth. If someone texts her, she measures effort. If someone shows interest, she unconsciously evaluates whether it feels as grounded as it did with you. And here's the critical shift. She starts recognizing your value not through what you said, but through what you no longer give. Attention, consistency, emotional investment. Absence magnifies contribution, but this phase is fragile. If during this time you break and reach out from loneliness, you interrupt the psychological buildup. Regret requires space to mature. It cannot develop in chaos. You must understand something deeply uncomfortable. The more centered you become without her, the more she feels the gap. If she senses you are rebuilding, focusing on your health, your goals, your discipline, it amplifies the narrative in her mind. Because now she's not just losing the relationship, she may be losing the upgraded version of you. And loss of potential is heavier than loss of comfort. This is when dreams start happening. Random reminders. A song, a place, a phrase you used to say. Emotional memory is sensory. It doesn't disappear neatly. Now the testing may become slightly stronger, a longer message, a question with emotional weight, maybe even vulnerability masked as nostalgia. I was thinking about that trip we took. I realized something recently. This isn't accidental. It's a bridge attempt. But here is where strength matters most. If you respond from need, you collapse the polarity. If you respond from calm clarity, you maintain it. Regret at this stage is no longer ego-driven. It's attachment-driven. She's beginning to feel the cost, and cost creates urgency. But urgency doesn't always mean action. There's one final psychological wall she must confront before regret becomes confession. And most men never hold long enough to see it fall. There comes a moment, usually later than you expect, when the internal resistance finally gives way. This is phase 7, emotional acceptance of loss. Up until now, she has been oscillating. Pride versus longing. Logic versus feeling. Curiosity versus ego. But when enough time passes and your silence remains consistent, the fantasy that you might automatically return starts to dissolve. And that's when it hits. Not as drama, not as cinematic heartbreak, but as clarity. She realizes you may truly be gone. This is the psychological threshold where regret becomes real. Because the human mind can tolerate temporary distance. It struggles with permanent consequences. When she senses permanence, her nervous system responds differently. The comparisons stop being theoretical. They become final evaluations. She replays the relationship not to justify leaving, but to measure what was lost. Your consistency, your effort, your patience, the emotional safety you provided when you were at your best. And now she sees something she couldn't see before. Your value wasn't loud, it was stable. Stability is often underestimated in the moment and deeply missed in the absence. At this stage, her outreach, if it comes, feels different. It carries weight. Less ego, less testing, more vulnerability, not always dramatic apologies. Sometimes it's subtle honesty. I didn't expect this to feel like this. I've been thinking a lot. I miss what we had. But here's the truth that separates disciplined men from reactive ones. The goal of no contact was never to make her regret you. It was to make you remember yourself. Because if you used this time correctly, something shifted inside you too. You stopped negotiating your standards. You stopped chasing clarity from someone who was uncertain. You stopped over-explaining your value. And when she feels your emotional steadiness now, it's different. You're no longer reaching from fear of loss. You're evaluating from strength. This is the final equation most men misunderstand. Regret grows in proportion to your absence multiplied by your growth. Absence alone can create curiosity. Growth alone can create attraction. But absence plus visible self-respect creates impact. And sometimes this is important. Her regret won't lead to reconciliation. Sometimes it leads to silent realization. Sometimes it leads to watching from a distance. Sometimes it leads to a lesson she carries into another relationship. Your job was never to control the outcome. Your job was to master your response. If she comes back, it must be to meet a version of you that no longer tolerates emotional inconsistency. If she doesn't, your evolution still stands. So here's the question I want you to answer honestly. If she reached out today, not out of loneliness, not out of boredom, but with genuine regret, would you want her back, or do you just want validation that you mattered? Be honest with yourself, because the answer to that equation reveals whether you've truly grown or whether you're still seeking closure disguised as love. Write your answer in the comments. And if this shifted something inside you, like the video, subscribe and share it with a man who needs to understand the psychology behind silence before he breaks it too soon. Sometimes the most powerful move you make is the one you don't announce.